Get started here, everybody. Hi, everyone out there who's tuning in. My name is Raymond Arvelo. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Programs here at Rice. I overlook our young alumni, which is anyone who's graduated from Rice over the past 10 years. We have 3 of our 4 panelists here. We're waiting on 1 more, so hopefully Veronica will join us shortly. But we have a great lineup here for you today. This is Young Alumni and Entrepreneurship. This is our last topic in our Young Alumni Live series for the spring. We'll hopefully be joining again soon in the fall with some more topics for you. Just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions for our panelists, there is a Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to use that feature if you have any questions for them, and we'll be sure to answer those throughout this webinar. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kyle Judah.
Hey, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Judah. I'm the Executive Director of the Liu Idea Lab for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Rice University. For those of you who have graduated in the last 5 years, you probably know a little bit about Lily, but for those who didn't cross our doors in the Cambridge office building, we are the Center for Everything Entrepreneurship at Rice, in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So for undergrads, we're running our new entrepreneurship minor, which we launched at the start of this academic year. For graduate students, the concentration for MBA students, and starting to expand that portfolio of offerings for grad students from the engineering, sciences, and other corners of campus. And outside of the classroom is where we really focus on doing a lot of our work, providing the space, physical co-working space for student and faculty founders from across campus, the personalized mentorship and connections to folks like you're seeing on this webinar here today, as well as others from around the Houston community, other startup ecosystems, our incredible alumni base, and most importantly, equity-free funding, so we can put small checks behind your big ideas. And, you know, really our mission is to help prepare students while they're a part of our Rice community, give them the entrepreneurial mindset, give them the entrepreneurial skill set and that Batman tool belt so they can go off and be lifelong entrepreneurs and innovators well after their time at Rice, your time at Rice has wrapped up. And as a part of that, we do have a number of different programs for alums. I'm going to kick some links into the chat so that you all know, but if you are an alumni entrepreneur working on a venture, just getting started, maybe you've raised less than $1 million in funding. This year, for the first time, we've split the Napier Rice Launch Challenge, which is the campus business plan and new venture competition. We just held the student one last week. We had an incredible, diverse array of ventures and founders. 85 ventures from across campus applied to participate in that competition. This year, for the first time, we have an alum competition now too. You can find more information. I just kicked the link into the chat. But if you've raised less than $1 million, you're in our sweet spot to apply. That application deadline is May 28th. Beyond that, we also have this incredible community called the Rice Alumni Entrepreneurs and Innovators Group. It's now 3,000 strong from every time zone. So many countries around the world are a part of this. It's just a way to stay connected so that you have that connective tissue back to campus, back to fellow alums in the Bay Area, in LA, in New York, in Austin, in Boulder, and everywhere in between, so that you don't have to go through this entrepreneurial journey alone and by yourself. We run a number of roundtables, peer CEO groups, you name it, workshops and resources for how to access PPP and everything else that you need to learn on the fly to hopefully transition your venture if you started on campus to the broader community. But if you're starting wherever you might be in the world, that you don't have to do it alone, that we can help you thrive. We can connect you with the resources that you need to pour jet fuel on the fire that you've got going. So that's me. That's what Lily's all about. We're excited to have 4 phenomenal alums here today with us from big growth stage, rocket ship tech companies, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs operating in the trenches, and we're gonna have opportunities to learn a little bit more about what their lives are like. I will make sure that we save time at the tail end for any questions that you all watching might have, but if you have them in the meantime, and as these incredible panelists are sharing their stories and their lessons learned and their experiences, since walking across that graduation stage at Rice, please kick them into the chat, kick them into the Q&A so that we can keep track of it. I'll make sure that I do my best Guy Raz impersonation here. So we touch on all the great different backgrounds and experiences from our panelists. So panelists, thank you so much for joining us here. I'm gonna call each of you out individually. Just if you wouldn't mind giving us your year of graduation, major, res college, and where in the world are you working right now? Give us kind of the 30-second overview for your company, your work on a day-to-day basis before we dive into more specific questions. So first up, Veronica, if you wouldn't mind sharing your story, where you're at with Niantic these days.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Veronica Saron, graduated Will Rice, class of 2014, majored in economics. But what I really did there was, because folks know economics is not a particularly difficult degree to check the boxes on, because there's not that many classes that you have to finish. I basically took whatever classes I freaking wanted and then happened to finish an economics degree. I also co-founded Allspark, which y'all know about. Allspark is amazing. I'm so happy and not necessarily surprised that it's continued to grow and continue along. But it's just weird that it was one of these dreams I had when I was a college student, to think that we could have a really cool entrepreneurship accelerator, entrepreneurship program on campus. Now it is what it is today. And so I'm very happy to see the community continuing to thrive. Right now, I am not an entrepreneur. This is something that the other folks on the panel and I were talking about in advance of this panel. There are precisely two entrepreneurs on this panel, Akash and Apoorv, who will be talking to y'all. I'm not an entrepreneur. Maybe one day I will be. But right now, I am at a company called Niantic. It has made a lot of augmented reality games, including Pokemon Go. I'm product marketing manager for Pokemon Go. It's a very fun job, very challenging, but because of the content and because of my team, I enjoy it every day. So I'll kick it over to the next person.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Veronica. Appreciate it. And thank you for you and Akash and so many others who did the work in the trenches 9+ years ago to stand up Allspark, so that our student founders have that as a resource and opportunity moving forward. Next up, Jonathan. Welcome to the stage, man, all the way from the Bay Area, but with the beautiful background of campus.
Yeah, I stole this background from you guys, so thanks for the handout here. Hey, everyone, I'm Jonathan. I'm a Martell College class of 2014, so I didn't come from a college. So I was a history major. So Veronica, I had fewer requirements to graduate than Veronica did. So I took probably an even more random smattering of classes to get through Rice in those 4 years than anyone else did. And actually spent a lot of time working on entrepreneurial ventures. So I actually credit Akash here on this call as the one guy who really inspired me to walk away from being a pre-med and going down that route and turning over into being an entrepreneur, being interested in the entire startup ecosystem, and also eventually becoming a VC as well. It all started with Akash when he, we had our first conversation about Wizga, which is a company that we worked on together back in around, I think, 2010 to 2012. Nowadays, I'm a VC at Scrum Ventures here in the Bay Area. We are an early stage venture fund investing in all sorts of technologies. So my last few investments were in everything from VR remote surgical training platforms to B2B SaaS for car dealerships to an end-of-life at-will planning platform. And my most recent investment was in something that was in the brain-computer interface space. So really wide range of technologies that we invest in. Our fund invests mostly across the US and Japan. We've made about 84 investments to date with 14 exits. Actually, one of the portfolio companies I invested in got acquired for $100 million just last month. And so I'm very, very excited about that. And yeah, I spend most of my time talking to founders, doing due diligence on companies, helping to make decisions on investments that we make. But on the side, I also co-host a podcast called The Capitalist Adventures, which is a podcast where I bring on my friends to talk who come from diverse backgrounds and have really interesting stories, and just dive into the diversity of thought in the entrepreneurship and VC space. In my first season, I'm around 8 or 9 episodes in now. First season is going to be probably finished after 12 episodes, and then I'm going to start talking to entrepreneurs. So I'm definitely going to bring Akash on. I'm going to hit you up, Apoorv, as well. Bring some good Rice alum entrepreneurs onto the podcast to explore your stories. And so that's what I do.
Fantastic. What was the name of the podcast again? Drop it again. This is
Capitalist Adventures.
There we go. We're all just webinars to promote podcasts and podcasts to promote funds and funds, all for you entrepreneurs out there. Our third member of the panel is apparently the Pied Piper of student founders, Akash Morrison. Welcome to the panel, man. We'd love to learn a little bit more about your background, your superhero origin story.
Pied Piper, I like it. I don't know if I'm like Richard or Ehrlich. We'll have to make that decision a little bit later. But yeah, no, I appreciate. Shoot, man, John, I appreciate that shout out. Yeah, that was the first entrepreneurial venture I worked on back at Rice. We wanted to start essentially the Glassdoor of internships. It totally failed. That actually led, though, to us realizing that at the time, and this has totally changed, which is awesome to see. At the time, Rice was not really up to snuff in terms of supporting undergraduate entrepreneurship. And so, to Veronica's credit, her, Vivas Kumar, and Darren Clifford, who was an MBA candidate at the time, and Brian Hassan, who was an alum, roped me into the Allspark team, and we ended up getting it off the ground in the 2012-2013 school year. And that was an entrepreneurial journey kind of on its own, which we can talk about maybe on the podcast, John. But yeah, thanks for having me. So I live here in LA, I think the only one not in the Bay Area. I graduated, 2013, Will Rice College, obviously the best. I was an ELEC. So I think the takeaway, because Apoorv is also an engineer, is that only engineers can do startups. Is that the takeaway?
Oh,
anyway.
don't even.
No, I'm totally kidding. Anyway, that's definitely not the takeaway. But just had to poke fun at the history and the econ majors there. So yeah, today I run two businesses. One is a biotech startup. We're developing novel cancer therapeutics. Sorry, I got a puppy and he's making a bunch of noise. We're developing novel cancer therapeutics that's based on some research started initially by my grandfather when he moved here from India in the 1960s. And he's my co-founder. And so that's really fun to work on. We're in the very early pre-seed stages. And then the other business that I run day to day is called Optio Ventures. We're not a VC fund, at least not yet. We really are a consulting business that helps startups with operations, dive into the trenches, strategy. We actually try to be the McKinsey of startups, very early stage, and fundraising. So that's what I do day to day. Manage a small team of people here in LA. And so it's kind of got both flavors, like the traditional VC-backed startup, as well as really what's more like a small business run off of cash flow. So it's fun.
A lot of different fingers and a lot of different pies, a lot of different kinds of startups. I think it's going to prove for very interesting fertile ground for our discussion here. Last, not least, Apoorv Bhargava, CEO, co-founder of Weavegrid. Welcome to what amounts to a stage these days. Please share your story, share your genesis for being at Rice and getting into this role and getting into this world of startups and entrepreneurship and innovation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle. Thanks for having me all. It's really funny. I was going to start making fun of the VCs on the panel, and then I was like, no, come on, I can't do that. That would be just picking on Jonathan. Then I realized it'd be more fun to make fun of the growth company people because they're just basically milking cash from VCs, and that seems easier. So I probably do both. And so, yes, as Akash said, the two of us are the only founders on this panel. We've all started businesses that amount to selling textbooks in college or some stuff like that. And Akash did that successfully for Glassdoor. I'm kidding. I'm just making fun of you. Akash, Veronica, and I are very good friends. And so if I'm poking fun at them, it's just because we see each other like all the time. Jonathan, we should hang out more. So I'm Apoorv Bhargava. I was hands in 2012. I was a dual degree in chemical engineering, chemi, chubby, whatever the hell it is, and economics. I was Veronica's TA. I was her husband, Vivas Kumar's TA on engineering. I think the lesson learned here is if you TA people, they will go off and do magical and wonderful things. That's a good takeaway, I think. I just wrapped up a stint here at on Rice's Rice Engineering Alumni Board, and now I am apparently have been voluntold into being the head of the Rice Bay Area chapter for all ARA things. I didn't even know that, but I found out in my email as of a few days ago. So I live out here in San Francisco, and I guess my interesting story from Rice is I was one of the first student founders, is a bad word to use, but since we're on a panel about entrepreneurship, we'll go with it. I was one of the student leads for the Rice Center for Engineering Leadership, RCEL. And so I was part of the team that first kind of conceived the idea, worked very closely with the team, with the John Doerr's team and a bunch of other folks, obviously on the faculty administration side. Other interesting facts, I guess. So I run a post-Series A startup called Weavegrid. We're working at the intersection of of transportation and energy, which basically means that as more and more people are buying electric vehicles, something is happening to the grid. For any of you in Texas, I'm so sorry, you have a terrible grid. And so there's a lot going on in that intersection between climate, electric vehicles, electricity, a whole bunch of stuff. And we kind of bring digital tools like machine learning to a lot of that sector. It's been awesome. We're, as I mentioned, venture backed. We've grown 4x in the last year. I'm kind of terrified. And yeah, and lots more to share on that front. So with that, thanks again, and looking forward to answering some questions.
Awesome. Yeah, this is essentially just a Toastmasters. The panelists are going to be consistently roasting one another throughout the entire time. So I hope you all brought your A game. I'm just going to loop back, Veronica, to start off with one quick question for you. Obviously, Pokemon Go has been this, I mean, game-changing, massive experience, massive product. Definitely crossed over mainstream. My kids have been loving it this last year. But obviously, like, it is an outdoors, it is a socially oriented product from its early days, running very counter to what all of our lives have predominantly looked like over the last year. As a part of that big team, when coronavirus started hitting for y'all, how did you have to evolve how you were working and what sort of stuff y'all were doing to kind of fit the times and adapt so that the train didn't slow down for Pokemon Go, but you were kind of cognizant of what else was happening out in the world and across the country at the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want to try to make this as general as I can so that it's not just me telling war stories about Pokemon Go. So I'll tell you what the principles are when dealing with a crisis, and then I'll tell you what we did.
That's great.
Any given crisis that happens when you are an organization, a team, an individual, you really, once like you've dealt with and put space for the trauma elements of it, you really need to look at what your constraints are. So in the case of coronavirus, it was, people can't leave their houses necessarily. There are different constraints in different countries around the world. There are millions of people who play this game. We can't let our DAU, daily active users, drop because that's just not good for the business. But we also have to be respectful in terms of how we're communicating with our players. So we have to think about all those different constraints. Also keep in mind that it was different for every single country. We're a global game. And recognize that making changes that are country specific doesn't really make sense because that just doesn't scale. And so we had to come up with not really a one size fits all, but some kind of combination of configurations that are global in the game, along with messaging that we can tailor properly to this user base. And that's the kinds of things we were able to do in the immediate run and the medium term. But then in the medium to longer term, we knew we had to build out features and modify features so that they could be played with the same ethos of bringing people together and being social, but maybe not necessarily being together in the same place, literally. So we built out a remote raiding feature. And the way that was designed was to allow people to raid, but maybe you get invited to a given location. So it's still grounded in the real world, still grounded in real world principles. But say I'm raiding and I want to invite Kyle to a raid, he doesn't necessarily have to be there. I can invite him. I would be at the location, so it's still a gamified real world location, but Kyle is coming in from abroad, you could say. So that was a tool to allow people to connect in spite of that. We also leaned in on features that did not need you to get together in person. So really catching Pokemon. So it's like, all right, how can we amplify this experience? Well, we have incense. Let's make incense last longer. Let's make it more effective. Let's make the spawn rates higher so that people can play from home, even though the better experience is that you go outside. Let's do less walking bonuses in our games because we know people can't necessarily leave. Let's encourage people to be in their homes and get exercise and then use that for their bonuses that they may get within the game. So basically, we had to go bit by bit within the game, see what we can modify, see what we can message out, and then use that as a basis for what we were doing. So that's a broad summary, but essentially whenever you're dealing with a crisis, you have to look at what your constraints are, and then that's where you can get creative.
That's a great way of framing it. And I think, especially the last 14, 15 months, people have been craving community more than ever. And that certainly manifests, especially in the gaming community. And so awesome to see how you've evolved and rolled with these many punches over the last 14, 15 months, but the game and the community and the product just continues to thrive across the board. So props, kudos, many others have not done nearly as well as y'all have. Keeping it moving. Jonathan, it's an interesting time to be a VC these days. More venture money, more venture funds, more competition than ever from the different sources of funding and financing available for founders out there. I mean, what are you seeing at the 30,000, the 50,000 foot view? How has maybe your experience as a founder with Akash and at Rice influenced how you operate and how you act as an investor these days?
Yeah, well, COVID was very interesting, right? So, during COVID, most venture funds kind of clamped down on investing in new startups because we were mostly scared about what was to come. And we wanted to keep our capital kind of close to vest in case we needed to bail out some of our portfolio companies.
And VCs are great at wearing vests, by the way.
We are very good. Yeah, the Patagonia vest, the typical VC uniform that you see, you see people on Twitter making fun of us for. It's absolutely true. That's all we have in our closets, actually.
Jacket though, right?
This is a Columbia jacket, so I'm being a little rebellious today. I'm not wearing Patagonia.
Contrarian.
Breaking form,
absolutely. But yeah, these days, I'm seeing valuations skyrocket. In the most recent YC class, typically, when we look at YC companies, they're pre-seed, pre-revenue, sometimes even pre-product. And oftentimes they're already commanding anywhere upwards of 15 to 20 million in valuations, which is already pretty ludicrous for companies at that stage. This past YC batch that happened in March, there were at least 3 or 4 companies asking me for $50 million valuations. And there was one that asked me for $100 million at the seed stage. With very minimal traction. So, it's become a startups market. There's a lot of money, flowing in from angel groups, institutional VCs, a lot of CVCs popping up, even groups like A16Z, who typically like to play around at that Series A, Series B level are now also backing pre-seed and seed funds now. Tiger Global and some of the larger growth equity funds are starting to make their way into the earlier stages too. So it's becoming, there's just too much capital in the markets these days. And that's really making investing really interesting. We have to get in earlier than we normally do. We have to spend a lot more time developing relationships with entrepreneurs way before they start fundraising so that we have even a chance to kind of squeeze in as a follow-on investor into these major rounds, or we just have to know people to squeeze our way in. And even for the ones where we're kind of on the fringe, on the border of trying to squeeze into, then we become the salespeople. So typically, when entrepreneurs are pitching VCs, they're the salespeople selling their company. It's no longer that way anymore. At least, in my experience, I'm the one spending a lot of time selling entrepreneurs on why they should accept my money, what value I bring to the table, why they want to get in bed with me for the next 10, 15 years, or however long their company is going to be around for. And it's become a very interesting game to play. And even kind of where we invest has shifted dramatically. You know, we are generalist investors, industry agnostic. So, you know, our thesis is very dynamic. It changes and flows, and, you know, depending on what's going on and depending on what we see might happen over the next year or two. And, you know, we're looking a lot more these days at climate, sustainability, deep tech, frontier tech space. You know, these are things that we've, you know, and my last investment in the brain-computer interface space, these are things that we've never, ever looked at in the history of our fund, but that we see as kind of major inflection points in tech adoption over the next few years. So we're shifting our focuses now to some of these new kind of deep tech and frontier tech areas, which has been a very interesting transition for us as well. So a lot of changes going on in VC, a lot of funds popping up too. So during COVID, a lot of people either lost their jobs or decided they, you know, wanted to use this time to focus more on themselves. And a lot of new funds popped up. A lot more new fund managers that I've seen come into this market than I've ever seen before. So yeah, that's all compounded into this very interesting ecosystem where there's a lot more capital, a lot more VC money in here now. And so entrepreneurs kind of have their pick for who they want to partner with now.
Can I like add something to that just to make this a little spicy?
Go for it.
Do it.
I think there has never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. And yet this is totally bimodal. This is totally bimodal. There are still plenty of VCs who will take advantage of entrepreneurs who don't know how to raise. And sorry, Jonathan, I'm not saying you're taking advantage of people, but like there are plenty of people who cannot raise good rounds. And there are plenty of people who are raising incredible rounds. But like, don't look at the average, because honestly, that's like taking two humps of a camel and smushing them together and saying, oh, there's only one hump. That's not the reality. The reality is there's one mode, and the vast majority, frankly, it's not actually like an equal bimodal distribution either. There's a huge chunk of people who are still raising at crap valuations, aren't getting that much money. And then there's a small group that's raising at bonkers valuations.
Yes.
Right. And I think be very careful when you're looking at the numbers, you know, as a wannabe entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing about that though is also if you look at the diversity of founders being funded as well, women, you know, African-American founders, Asian-American founders, Latinx founders are still doing very poorly. You know, we thought that, you know, with this huge boom in funding dollars in the space, there will be some more kind of, you know, equality, you know, across the board here, but that hasn't turned out that way. So yes, you're absolutely right. Very bimodal. And, you know, the kind of disparity in funding across the different groups has actually widened, which also is probably why these valuations are increasing so much. You know, people are so much more competitive for kind of the upper echelon of the most kind of in-demand deals that are still typically kind of, you know, richer, wealthier white men who are the ones who are typically founders of these companies who are able to land these humongous rounds from the top VCs. And, you know, that's still a big problem that we have to change in our industry.
I do think though, like the only person on this panel who has raised venture capital is Apoorv, unless Akash, you have something to tell me. But I mean, Apoorv raised Apoorv, you're going to be modest, and that's weird that I'm calling you modest, but like, what is it, like 15 million from Coatue or something like that? Coatue leading?
Yeah,
not in his head. Yeah.
It's a demurred yes.
I cannot confirm or deny.
I mean, like, it's what I'm saying here is like, or is it Tiger Global leading? I'm not sure. You know, these people, it's hard to get their money when you're actually the entrepreneur on the other side, even though it looks like there's very sloshy valuations, because at the end of the day, they still want good deals.
It's true. I look at maybe 3,000 pitches a year. We invest in 10 companies, and that's pretty normal. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, people are still seeking the best deals, but those best deals, it turns out it's less about what the valuation is and more about like really specifically who is the entrepreneur and have they won before. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I've seen in terms of like investor preference is like, you know, has this team like generated a win before? Have they worked together, et cetera? And that makes a ton of sense, like as a heuristic to utilize. But you know, really to Apoorv's point, it makes it tough for first-time founders. I mean, we're literally raising money for like something that has demonstrated regression in every single type of solid tumor that we have ever tested in mice. And, you know, one of the biggest criticisms that I get is that I'm not an MD or a PhD. And, you know, it totally, like, I'll give people some validity to that. But I mean, you know, I can chop it up with the best in terms of the science. And we have a really awesome team behind it. But yeah, it does make it challenging, you know, if you haven't already generated a win or like been in the industry for 30 years, and guess who's done that? Again, it is kind of, you know, the older white men who have done that just because historically they've done it. And so you see them really continue to receive the premium valuations, better deals, et cetera. Whereas kind of the scraps are really left to scrappy, young, and oftentimes diverse founders. So it's an interesting environment.
What do y'all think needs to change? And Apoorv, I'll let you have first crack at this one and then go around the horn. But what do y'all think actually has to change from who ends up cutting those checks and who are the LPs into those funds in order to be a lever that we can start pulling on so that female founders, diverse founders have an honest shot at being able to get into those rooms, to get the meetings that they need to make the case for why the ventures that they're building, you know, can be so transformational and deserve that funding too.
Apoorv, are you on?
No, I'm not. I was just taking a minute to think about that. And sorry, I know we've like jumped around. I apologize for like screwing up your order here, Kyle. So
this is Hot Ones Rice style. So
yeah. I mean, look, this is what my Twitter is. It's just me shooting from the hip and like not giving a shit. So this is now on entrepreneurship and VC, which I happen to have done a little bit of both. I think what I'll say is this. Something that is hard for most people to conceptualize, right, is that venture capital is one of many sources of capital. The problem is when all of us think about big successful startups, we like go back to thinking about the Silicon Valley HBO show and The Social Network, and you hear the term venture capital, venture capital, venture capital. And I think what ends up happening is we have these visions of like, that's the only way that we can get funded. 75% of funds that call themselves venture capital are frankly not venture capital. They will never make the asset returns that venture capital commands. It just won't happen, right? So it's not actually venture capital. It's disguised as venture capital. I think one of the challenges there is then identifying businesses that truly will grow in a fashion that they will then return venture capital like returns, right? And you know, we've done lots of cool things along the way to like kind of demur the fact. We've said, oh, like this is biotech VC, and this is climate VC, and this is this. It's like, no, that's all shit. Like at the end of the day, venture capital is a type of asset, and it needs to return a kind of, like venture capitalists aren't here doing charity. They want to make money too. Honestly, they want to make more money than you want to make money as an entrepreneur. You're actually trying to solve a real problem. They just want to give you money. They're just trying to actually make money, right? They're trying to make money from pension funds that are run by old 70-year-old white men. Like that's frankly what's happening. That's their LP base. So we could argue that the LP base needs to diversify. The reality is I'm not going to be alive when that happens. So that's just gonna, that's going to take time. I think what needs to happen is that we need to give exposure, like true exposure of an honest exposure of what it is to build a venture capital backable business to founders of diverse backgrounds. The number of female founders, founders of color who I have met who have wonderful ideas, but then end up saying like venture capitalists won't take my meeting, I don't have access, blah, blah. But then you realize like actually, and it's not just those people, it's them and a lot of other people who come from more traditional backgrounds. There are a lot of businesses that just shouldn't be venture capital backed. But when you have so much capital sloshing around, I think what ends up happening is everyone brands themselves as something ventures and then goes in and they have no reputation. They have no reputation. They're not Founders Fund. They're not A16Z. They're not Tiger. They're not coaches. They're nothing. So what ends up happening is they settle for the safe and obvious option, which is a Stanford, Harvard, blah, blah, blah founder who is white and male. And because that, and then they only try getting, like, in a 15 million round, they might get in 100K and they'll say, oh, I invested in Lyft. And it's like, no, dude, you put in a fucking check. Like, sorry, guys, excuse my French. You put in a fucking check in Lyft at like, an 80, an $80 million round, you put in 100K, like, shut up. You didn't actually make venture returns. But I think what ends up happening, right, is like you have to understand the dynamics of the system that you're dealing with. And I think the biggest way that we can change some of that is by really giving true exposure to all founders of all kinds, and like actually getting founders to understand what the incentives of the people who are giving them money are. And I think that's one of the biggest broken things, is that I try my hardest. I mean, frankly, this is why I'm here right now, right? Like, I try my hardest to actually get in front of people who don't have exposure, having come out of Stanford Business School like me, to actually see the messed up dynamics and incentives of how this sector works and who funds what. Sorry, it was a very long answer. It was a little rambly, but
I want second, third, and fourth Apoorv's notes here. As a woman of color, I think I can uniquely say that everything he said is true. I mean, I was joking about Tiger and Coatue and all these places. By the way, those are the biggest venture funds or funds that are doing venture capital things in the Bay Area. And so we got names like Tiger, Coatue, A16Z, Founders Fund. These are like these are the blue chips, if you will, when it comes to when you're raising money. And so if you can raise money from any one of those, it becomes this signal that you can raise money. It's very, very hard to do. Just because you see all these different headlines in the news about these companies being able to raise the funds, it is hard. And I think that you need to get a little bit like insane to be willing to start a company, and you have to be willing to push through all of those no's in order to do one of these companies. And then again, not all companies should be taking venture money. Apoorv is taking venture money. He's going to continue to raise rounds as his company scales. I'm sorry, Apoorv, I don't want to speak for you, but like, but it is hard. It is unbelievably hard to start a company. And so the exposure to what is really out there is so, so, so important. I can't underscore, I mean, my husband is starting a company. My best friends all have their own companies. And I can't tell you how emotionally draining and difficult it is. And so the last thing that you need is to go into the fundraising process or the company starting process with being primed to be offended because you're a woman or you're of color or whatever it may be. Because even for the people who are really, really, who have all the right credentials, it is still hard. And the media will not tell you that.
I have one more thing. Sorry, just one quick framework. Sorry, Akash, go ahead.
No, go for it. I'll remember my thought. I just feel bad. We're bashing John's whole career.
No, we're not bashing John. I mean, John's here, right? He's here, he's present. He's actually trying to make this work. We're bashing the sector. And it's not even bashing the sector. It's recognizing that every capital tranche look, if you're trying to build a business, you're trying to raise capital. If you're trying to raise capital, you should understand that every capital has an expected return allocated to it. No equity, no strings attached capital from Rice is great capital because it means they don't expect any returns, right? There is a lot of different types of capital, and your job as an entrepreneur is to think honestly about what stage you're in and how much capital you need and how risky that is. Because fundamentally going to a venture capitalist and saying, give me dollars because I'm building a company and like it's a ton of risk in my head, isn't the same as them saying, actually, there's like 4 types of risk and they're an X on 3 of them. Venture capitalists don't actually take risk on things that are X's on 3 of the 4 types of risk. They take risks on things which are like 2 X's maybe 3 of them are actually check marks. I mean, the point is if there are 4 to 5 kinds of risk, market, technology, product, founder, whatever, you can't be a failure across all of them right now for somebody to say, oh, you're risky, so I should give you venture capital dollars. You have to de-risk. And so sometimes a lot of that de-risking, especially for hard tech companies, which is where I spent more of my venture capital background, it really is about understanding that like this thing's just going to take time. If I have the opportunity to be in a lab, unfortunately, a lot of PhDs tend to be white dudes. If I have an ability to be in a lab, if I have an ability to go to a national lab or go to like some sort of biotech incubator, whatever, and just suffer through the 1 to 2 years that needs to be done there to de-risk the technology, that's valuable, right? That's really valuable, because then a venture capitalist will say, oh, out of the 5 types of risk, you actually de-risked 1, 2, and 3. Now you're good. Now I can give you venture dollars. Now you're going to grow and give me the kind of returns I want to see. So keep that framework in mind as you're thinking about building a business.
Akash, jump on in, because you're the one in the trenches at exactly this stage, dealing with a lot of these exact issues and dynamics that we're talking about now. Would love your thoughts on it. And then I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I want to make sure that we're leaving any time. If y'all in the audience have questions, fire them into the chat, fire them into the Q&A feature. We'll pull them up and run through in the last 15-minute speed run here.
Yeah. It is such an interesting conversation, because this is exactly where I spend like 90% of my week, because both as a founder, actually like sitting on the other side of the table from VCs and answering questions, et cetera, as well as someone who's like working with founders and in pitches for them. I mean, probably this year I've sat through like 100 pitches. It's been really interesting. And so you learn a lot, and you learn a lot about exactly what Apoorv is talking about in terms of the mental models that they are trying to utilize in terms of making their decisions. So I'll say a couple of things. I appreciate the process of speaking with investors, but you cannot have the expectation that you're going to walk away with a check. Like that, you just have to actually set that expectation at the beginning, and then you can appreciate it for intellectually what it is. There's 2 really valuable things that I've found come out of conversations with VCs. Particularly, number one was risk, as Apoorv was talking about, like they're driven to like mitigate all forms of risk. And so like they will just look through your business and like identify all of the risk factors and talk to you about them. And actually that's great for you as a founder, because, we talk about customer discovery in terms of like trying to figure out who your customer is for your actual product. But in terms of actually trying to figure out who your investor is, I mean, you can use VCs as customer discovery tool to figure out, what areas of risk still exist within your business. And it's great because you get a lot of ways to change your pitch. Maybe it like, you figure out, hey, we need to hire a CTO or whatever. Then the other thing that's really interesting is, and this is totally on the other end of the spectrum, is they're really, once they kind of agree with like, yeah, you've checked these boxes, right, in terms of risk, then they are like, okay, how do I get this 10x return? And then they start kind of pushing you to the upside. And it's really kind of interesting because I won't go too deep into the science of what we're doing, but it's actually helped us figure out how to like frame our story a little bit better for the biotech startup, because we were presenting like this whole suite of options at first, and they viewed that as a risk because we're working on too many things. As soon as we picked one though, and then alluded to the fact that there was another, they like got comfortable with all the risks surrounding this one option. And then they're like, hey, have you thought about this other thing? And we're like, I'm glad you asked. There's this whole other, avenue we're working on. But when we presented it as a menu of options, they're like, there's too much risk to handle. I don't know. So it's interesting. It can be fun from an intellectual perspective, but if you're really like, if you're in need of cash, it can be less fun. So, this is, I think, really why I chose to do what I have done, which is run these 2 businesses at the same time, which is a little crazy, but I needed to figure out how to pay rent. And also the profits from one are helping me actually bootstrap the other startup. And so I would say, learn as much as you can from the like VC and investor conversation process. Don't necessarily expect you're going to walk away with a check, though, because that's not super likely if you're a first-time founder.
Yeah, Akash, those are all really good points. And I know I want all the entrepreneurs to know here that a lot of the VCs.
The child's not evil.
Well, yeah, that too. But a lot of VCs that you talk to will try to tell you how to run your own company. But that's not our job, or that's not what we're supposed to do. But you'll find a lot of VCs will try to do that to you.
Totally.
Will tell you, oh, I don't see the product market fit here, or I think your team needs to expand, or I don't think your traction is fast enough, or your financial models don't suggest a quick enough growth curve over the next couple of years, or like you need to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. And, you know, that's also why we get such a bad rap. You know, as VCs, we're telling the entrepreneurs who are actually building the companies and actually, you know, making the difference. We're telling them what to do and how to do it. And so that's what it comes down to, you know, founder investor fit, right? You got to find the investor that sees you and your company for what you know, who you are and what the company is, and is there to be supportive and to offer, you know, support and knowledge, and to offer some advice, but not tell you how to do things, and will just be a resource for you on your journey. And that's, you know, there are good VCs, you know, in the industry who will open up their networks, who will, you know, try to be a productive board member and try to, you know, be devil's advocate for decisions that you make, just so that you're better informed, and will, you know, try to draw on past experiences of companies they've founded or companies they've invested in that have gone down a similar path to you, and all the positives and the negatives of those journeys, and try to relay those over to you so that you don't make the same mistakes and that you can do well. But yeah, fundamentally, you know, it's a crapshoot. A lot of VCs walk into this industry with very inflated egos. I initially was one of them as well. I don't know, compared to others, maybe I still am. I have no idea how to compare myself to the others. But yeah, there's, you know, entrepreneurs, there's two sides to the story. There's two types of, there's always multiple types of VCs that you can go for. And so you just have to be very careful about who you talk to, about who you decide to work with. But remember, this is a lifetime journey for your company. If you're going to give away equity to an investor, remember that it's like a body part. You cut it off, you don't get it back. It doesn't grow back, and it doesn't just magically pop back. And you know, whoever you give this to owns that piece for a very, very long time. So you have to be very prudent. So that as much due diligence as investors do on your company, you need to do as much or even more due diligence on the investors that you're working with, all the same.
Plus 100% to that. It is easier to get divorced from your life partner than to get somebody off of your cap table once they're on it. Be judicious, be careful, do your diligence on those folks as well. We're rounding the corner, y'all. Unfortunately, we have a limited amount of time for the first of our podcast network here that we're building on out. I know there's been some questions firing away in the chat. By all means, Jonathan, it seems like this one is for you. What is the highest value add thing a VC can provide post investment?
Yeah, actually, I know Meg. Meg was a VC too. She used to work at the Yield Lab, helping out a lot of entrepreneurs in the ag and food space, which is awesome. I mean, different VCs provide different kinds of value. Every VC is structured a little bit differently. For us, for example, all of our LPs are major Japanese corporations, and so, you know, a lot of the companies that we work with want to enter the Japanese market, but the biggest challenge there is if you don't have partners locally, or if you don't have boots on the ground, it is an excruciating process to do any kind of business in Japan. It takes a long time. It's very, very bureaucratic. It takes them a long time to make decisions on anything. And so the value we bring is, you know, we have these curated relationships with our LP base. That also is looking to be partners or looking to acquire companies or make investments or co-develop new products with startups. And we can help facilitate those conversations and get them moving a lot faster than normal. So we're, you know, accelerating some of the customer kind of, you know, sales processes for some of our companies. We also have a team in Tokyo doing a lot of boots on the ground work for our companies if they want to launch subsidiaries there, or we can help them with hiring. But yeah, it really depends. You know, some VCs come in with incredible networks of founders or like they host a ton of events that are really, really useful or build communities of founders and investors or former entrepreneurs that can talk to each other and be very helpful to each other on the journey. You know, then you have like the incubator or accelerator VCs that have kind of those hybrid models where They are providing accelerator-like services to companies while also investing in them at the same time and trying to build that community as well. It really depends. And it also depends from an entrepreneur's perspective, what you're looking for and what you need. Some entrepreneurs, want more help, on figuring out their growth plans, and they need to find a VC that has experience in that space, or they're looking for very strategic types of partnerships and customers that a given VC maybe has a lot of insight into, or has a lot of network into, or they're looking for, someone who has expertise in hard tech or deep tech or frontier tech, or has a lot of partners sitting at the top of the VC fund that has a lot of experience in this space that can help them provide more credibility to the company in the rest of their fundraising round or in the future. It really depends on what the entrepreneur is looking for.
Can I maybe summarize that in one way, which is,
go for it.
The best way to summarize, I think, a lot of the good advice that Jonathan just gave was really just saying, be self-aware of what your biggest risk milestones are for going from one round to the next round. If you just raise venture capital and you think your biggest risk are customers, then look for that value add. If you think it's technical, then look for that value add, blah, blah, blah. You should be aware of what your own risk is. Like, you need to be very self-aware as an entrepreneur. If you don't know where your own risk lies, then it's going to be very difficult to find a VC who'll be value additive. Because if you raise capital from someone whose expertise is in go-to-market, but actually you're crushing that and your fears are all on the technical side, they're not going to be value additive. And then you're going to mope and be on Twitter and tell everyone the VCs aren't value additive. That's not the case, right? You need to be aware. It is your job as an entrepreneur to be aware.
I love that.
Like the ownership there.
Yeah. Turning into just our last couple of lightning questions to round out our time here together this afternoon. Veronica, I want to put you first up in the hot seat here. Obviously, you and Pokemon Go are playing, and Niantic in general is playing in a very interesting space, AR, VR. I've seen you talking a lot about digital collectibles and experiences moving online on your Twitter feed in the last couple of months. Also, what are you most interested in? What are you most excited about that you see as some interesting emerging stuff going on in that space?
That's a good question. Right now, the NFT space is not ready for gaming. I know there's a lot of people who are very bullish on that, but there's going to need to be some economics that get tried and true and shuffled around before NFTs can really become something that's exciting for the gaming space, and for blockchain to become more of a consumer technology that's solving interesting problems there. I'm excited for that to happen. In the meantime, I don't think it's going to happen for some time. I think there's a lot of people in the space right now who just want to make a quick buck. A lot of things that are being tested that don't really work. Every other day I get a VC friend of mine sending me a pitch deck about like blockchain and consumer technology, crypto, consumer NFT stuff, something. And majority of the companies that they send me are total dregs, not good deals, no bueno in my opinion. And oftentimes they'll get suckered into funding things like that because they don't really understand the gaming space. And a lot of folks will look at consumer technology and they'll be like, oh, I understand that, I'm a consumer. Like, no. There's a lot of very interesting economics and dynamics that happen behind the scenes in a lot of consumer products, especially in gaming. And it's really cool that I've gotten to see a lot of that over the past 3 years that I've had the opportunity to work at Niantic. But bottom line is there's some stuff I'm excited about, mostly in the crypto space and when it's going to cross over into consumer, but I don't think the industry is ready yet for it.
Awesome. Lightning round question. Apoorv, you're in the climate space. It's the once and future king industry. It was hot to trot in the early 2000s. A lot of venture capitalists, a lot of investors and founders got burned. But the cycle has come back again, where clean tech and climate tech are a very hot area. What is it like for you to be in the trenches, in the ground, day to day on not only a fascinating industry, but one that is like kind of critical path for our survival for the next couple of decades?
What part of that do you want me to answer? The part of how it is to be a day-to-day CEO, or how it is to be in this buzzy space right now?
Buzzy space. Let's talk buzzy space real quick.
buzzy space where I am actually an expert. Sorry, Veronica, I can't hear what you're saying.
Got a term sheet just now, I think, from Tiger Global. Happened. Crazy.
Okay, she's joking. I think the reality of being in this space right now is that it's, as someone who's been in the space since the last round, I think one of the big challenges that I am most worried about is that there are a lot of people who don't know the sector, but are convinced on the secular growth of the sector. And I think that's awesome. I think what happens though is that when there's a rush of capital into this kind of any kind of hype, right? It doesn't matter whether it's climate, previously it was AVs, at some point it's been blockchain. Well, it doesn't matter. Like ultimately the problem ends up being that there is hype around technology rather than towards outcomes and solutions. And so it's very, very bad to be throwing money into a space when you have very little understanding of fundamentally where the value creation is going to happen when said technology, said problem meets the market and the customers that need to buy it. Like, it's cool if you built the thing. No one cares. Like, I don't care if you built the cool thing. Someone's got to buy it at the end of the day for this to keep going. And so I think what is most exciting for me is that capital is flowing into the space because there's a long-term bet that people are willing to make, that they're saying, look, the space is exploding. There's going to be so much growth if we want to actually tackle the problem. What's nerve-wracking is that there's a lot of dumb money at the same time as a lot of smart money. And so as an entrepreneur, my job is really to figure out who here is going to be a good capital provider who can really partner with us, but also understands why the business we're building is actually solving a pain point versus us just intellectually fantasizing over some like technology that we've built. Like that isn't valuable at the end of the day. What's valuable is the business. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's the double-sided coin of capital, right? Are people rushing in because it is in the spotlight right now? It is an attractive space, but are they going to be here in 3, 5, 10 years time? Last question, because I know we're running out of time here. I'm going to turn it on over to you, Akash. And it's a question from the chat, which is just, we've talked a little bit about on the chat now of this barrier for a lot of folks who, in your space in life science and therapeutics, who don't necessarily have that MD credential. We've talked about, this tough transition from academic to actual entrepreneur. You're in the trenches also doing your master's in biotech, I believe, something around that sort of space. But, for those who might be still listening and watching this after the fact, who are in an academic area or in a research lab or in a national lab who want to make that transition on over, what's the sort of advice that you can give to them for folks who want to follow this same sort of path?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because I'm in the biotech space, like I see this all the time. This is actually kind of a constant conversation that is occurring because there's a lot of interest in the entrepreneurial space in general to try to draw more, PhDs, for example, or MDs into entrepreneurship in biotech because they need an influx of talent, et cetera. The path to get there is a little bit confusing, admittedly. So, there's a couple of things. You develop a really strong set of core skills as, getting a PhD, for example, in biochemistry or something like that. And a lot of those are definitely applicable in an entrepreneurial setting. Something that I've seen is that, if you do your PhD in a very specialized area, which, I mean, by the nature of writing a dissertation, it's going to be something like hyper specialized. You have to somehow figure out how to abstract yourself back out of that, like understand the landscape, because really, one of the common pitfalls is everyone comes out and to use, my space specifically, like in a bit of a pejorative way, everyone thinks they have the cure to cancer, right? Like, I mean, that's the kind of common thing, and you do get some exposure to like what's going on competitively, like immediately, like surrounding you, but you have to have a little bit of a broader set of context. So the biggest like advice that I can provide to kind of people who want to do like found something from an academic perspective is like really try to like go out, broaden your lens, figure out what's actually out there. Partner with someone who has been in the industry. That's the biggest key, because they'll know how to actually navigate, you know, how to actually find money, how to find partners, how to work with CROs, et cetera. And that's really a huge component of what you need. You're maybe missing that a little bit, but definitely, you know, PhDs have the talent to actually go out and start a company on their own. Just have to be a little bit aware of like what the reality is. And the other thing I'd mention is, you know, go and learn on someone else's dime for a little bit. You know, I live in LA, right? Like there's a lot of PhD students or, you know, PhDs that come out of UCLA, go to Amgen or another, you know, local biotech company and kind of learn on their dime for, you know, 3-5 years and go out and start your own company. That's the idea you had in the lab oftentimes will not necessarily have been developed even in that period of time by someone else. And you may gain a lot of perspective that way. So I think that's the best advice I can provide.
Tying the knot on all of this, because I know we've run over a couple of minutes now. Open your aperture, be aware of your surroundings, be aware of your skills and what you need as complementary experiences and background. Understand your flavor of risk in your space and in your venture, and know and find the right customers, the right partners, the right investors who also understand and are willing to mitigate that risk. And to the point that Jonathan made so candidly and so well, be very aware of who you're partnering with, who you're getting into bed with, what you're looking for with them, and are they the right partner for the long haul for you. Akash, Jonathan, Apoorv, our dearly departed Veronica, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you sharing your lessons, your insights, your advice, your opinions. We'll be back hopefully earlier than next year for the next of these podcasts. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions, if you're an alum interested in entrepreneurship, please feel free to reach out to myself and the Lilly Lab, kyle.judah@rice.edu. We look forward to helping you out. We look forward to more of these events and more entrepreneurs, more investors coming from Rice to build the next generation of game-changing venture firms and venture vehicles. Thank you all. Have a great day. Raymond, it's all you now, man.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you to our awesome young alumni panelists, Akash, Jonathan, Veronica, Apoorv. You are all doing great work, and I really appreciate you all being here. And Kyle and Lily and the RAEI who partnered with us on this event. Thank you for doing that. I did want to make one quick announcement. Next Monday, starting next Monday for pretty much the entire week, the 3rd through the 6th, we have our destination debut. For those who are looking forward to traveling in the future for next year, this is our Traveling Owls program where we'll be going over the tour destinations for our 2022 calendar year. So please be sure to join us. I left that link in the chat there, so please feel free to check that out next week. Once again, thank you all for being here and have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. You can find me on LinkedIn and go Owls.
Yeah, same here. See you guys around.